My name is Ellen. I'm 62 years old, a retired school teacher, and a widow of nearly a decade. I live with my son Ryan and his wife Leah in the house Ryan grew up in, a modest sunlit two-story home in upstate New York. It's not glamorous, but it's full of memories. Or it was. These days, it feels like I'm just passing through, like a guest overstaying her welcome. After my husband Michael passed, I stayed strong for Ryan. He was my only child. We grieved together, leaning on each other through the worst of it. For a while, it was just the two of us in that quiet, hollow house. Then came Leah. At first, I was happy for him. She was pretty, sharp, and confident, though I admit something about her eyes made me uneasy. Still, I gave her a warm welcome. I made space in the house, in the kitchen, in our lives. But slowly, things began to shift. My kitchen became her kitchen. My routines were labeled old-fashioned. My presence, once comforting, became in the way. Still, I kept quiet. I told myself to be grateful. They let me stay in the downstairs bedroom, the one Michael and I once shared. I spent my days helping around the house and watching my grandson when they both worked. I wasn't asked to. I just did it. That's what mothers do. Now, there's one thing I've held on to all these years: a gold bracelet. Michael gave it to me on our 25th anniversary. He wasn't flashy, not the type for grand romantic gestures. But this bracelet, it was different. It had a delicate wave pattern and a small heart charm engraved with the words, "Forever Elle." I still remember how he nervously handed me the box at dinner, clearing his throat before saying, "You've stood by me longer than anyone. I wanted you to have something that lasts." I cried when I opened it, not because of the gold, but because of the love behind it. Since then, I've worn that bracelet on every important day: Ryan's graduation, his wedding, Michael's funeral. I don't wear it often now, but I keep it safe in a velvet box in my drawer. Just seeing it brings me peace. It reminds me I was once loved deeply, that my life had meaning outside of cleaning and babysitting. I've noticed Leah glancing at it over the years. At first, it was just a passing look when I wore it on special occasions. But more recently, I caught her staring. Once, she even asked, "Do you ever think of selling that thing? It must be worth a lot, right?" I laughed it off, telling her some things are worth more than money. She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic, but the look on her face stayed with me. It wasn't admiration. It was calculation. Still, I didn't believe she'd do anything. I mean, who steals from family? But I should have paid closer attention to the way she kept asking little questions about my valuables, to how often she peeked into my room when she thought I wasn't home, to how she never asked me about my past but always seemed interested in what I owned. One night, I found her in my bedroom. She said she was looking for the laundry basket. I didn't think much of it then, but now looking back, I should have trusted the uneasy flutter in my chest. That bracelet wasn't just metal. It was a thread holding me together. The last tangible piece of a man who treated me with kindness and respect. The last proof that I once had a life full of love and dignity. And soon it would be gone. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful. I mean, I'm not a young woman anymore. I misplace things. I forget why I walked into a room. It happens, right? The first thing to vanish was a little silver spoon, part of a set I received as a wedding gift. I always used that one to stir my tea. It had a tiny floral engraving at the tip, and Michael used to joke that it was fancier than anything else in our kitchen. I searched the drawers, behind the sink, under the couch cushions. Nothing. Maybe it fell in the trash, I told myself. Or maybe Aiden took it while playing. Grandkids are curious like that. I let it go. But then my brooch went missing. A small ruby pin shaped like a leaf. It wasn't valuable to anyone but me. Michael gave it to me the day Ryan was born. It had been in a box in my dresser for years. One morning, I opened the drawer to check on it, and it was gone. I stood there for a long while, staring into the empty velvet lining, willing it to reappear. My fingers trembled as I carefully lifted each item in the drawer, hoping it had just shifted. But no, the brooch was gone. I sat down on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. "Don't jump to conclusions," I told myself. "You probably moved it and forgot." Still, something in my gut felt wrong. And once that feeling crept in, it didn't leave. Around that time, Leah's attitude started to change. Or maybe I just finally started noticing it. She used to be polite, if not particularly warm. But now, there was a sharpness in her tone when she spoke to me, especially when Ryan wasn't home. "Might want to stop leaving your things all over," she muttered one morning after I asked if she'd seen my missing scarf. "It's not a museum in here." I blinked at her, unsure how to respond. "I was just asking." She smirked and walked away. Later that day, I overheard her on the phone. Her voice was hushed, hurried. "No, she doesn't even notice. She thinks she just loses stuff," she said, laughing quietly. "Old people are like that. They forget." My heart dropped. I couldn't be sure she was talking about me, but the way her eyes shifted when she saw me standing in the hallway said enough. Ryan, bless his heart, was blind to all of it. He was always working late or buried in his laptop. When he was home, Leah was on her best behavior, smiling, affectionate, helpful. She'd hand me tea and ask how I was feeling. But the moment he left the room, the mask slipped. There was one evening I remember clearly. Ryan was out of town for a work conference. Leah came home late, her makeup smudged, the smell of cheap perfume trailing behind her. She dropped a shopping bag on the kitchen counter, a sleek black one from a store I knew wasn't cheap. "Have a good night," I asked gently. She glanced at me, expression unreadable. "Don't worry about it," she said. "You just focus on not losing your stuff again." That night, I sat on my bed and cried quietly into my pillow. Not just because things were disappearing, but because I felt myself disappearing too. Bit by bit, memory by memory. It wasn't just the missing objects. It was the way I was being erased. I used to run this house. Now I was barely allowed to exist in it. I didn't want to believe that Leah could be so cruel. I told myself she was just stressed or misunderstood. But deep down I knew. A woman knows when another woman is quietly gutting her world from the inside out. Still, I said nothing. I didn't want to cause a rift with Ryan. I told myself it would blow over, but the worst was yet to come because soon it wouldn't be the little things she took. It would be the one thing I never imagined losing. It was a Wednesday evening, quiet like most days now. I was folding laundry in the living room when Leah walked in, talking on her phone, laughing. She wore a sleek blouse, jeans that looked brand new, and her hair done in soft waves like she was coming back from somewhere important. I wasn't really paying attention until her hand brushed her hair back, and I caught a glint of gold on her finger. I froze. It was a ring I hadn't seen in years. My mother's gold filigree ring with a tiny opal stone in the center. I inherited it after she passed and had tucked it away safely in my jewelry box. I hadn't worn it in ages, not since Ryan's wedding, but I would never part with it. And now it was sitting on Leah's finger, like it belonged there. I waited until she hung up and then asked softly, "That's a lovely ring, Leah. Where did you get it?" She didn't miss a beat. "Oh, this." She held up her hand and shrugged. "Found it in one of your old drawers. Thought it was just some forgotten thing."
Ist sehr daher.
"That's not just something. That was my mother's." She smirked like I was overreacting. "You weren't using it." I opened my mouth, then closed it. My chest burned, but my voice came out barely above a whisper. "It wasn't yours to take." She rolled her eyes. "I didn't take it. I found it. Honestly, it was just sitting there collecting dust. I figured you'd be fine with it." I wasn't fine with it, but I didn't know how to say that without the tears forming and my throat spilling over. I turned away and walked into the kitchen, trying to calm my heartbeat. Later that night, when Ryan got home, I pulled him aside. "Ryan," I said gently, "Leah wore one of my rings today, one that belonged to my mother. I don't remember giving it to her." He sighed, already exhausted, already ready to defend. "Mom, please. It's just a ring. I'm sure Leah didn't mean anything by it." "But it's mine," I insisted. She didn't even ask. "She probably thought it was okay," he said, rubbing his temple. "Look, she's been stressed lately. Can we not make a big deal out of this?" My mouth opened, then closed again. It was like talking into a void. It wasn't about the ring. It was about the line that kept getting moved. First, my things went missing. Now she was wearing them in front of me, and Ryan, my own son, couldn't see the violation of it. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I thought about how many times I had rocked Ryan to sleep in this house, how many lunches I'd packed, how many tears I had wiped from his cheeks, and now he couldn't even stand up for me over a stolen ring. I felt small, unimportant, like an old vase in the corner. Once treasured, now collecting dust, slowly being replaced without a word. And still, I said nothing more because in this house, speaking up meant being labeled dramatic or overly emotional. I learned to swallow my hurt and smile through clenched teeth. But deep inside, a shift was beginning. I was starting to realize silence was no longer protection. It was permission, and I had given enough of that already. My granddaughter Ava was turning 10, and I had planned something special for her. She's a bright, curious girl, always asking about the olden days, as she calls them. A few weeks back, she sat beside me on the porch, her little hand wrapped around my wrist, and asked, "Grandma, do you have anything from when you were little?" I smiled and told her about my old jewelry box, how it held bits and pieces from different chapters of my life. A bangle from my first anniversary, a pendant Michael bought me after Ryan was born, earrings from my mother, and of course, the bracelet. I promised her we'd open the box together before her birthday, and I'd let her choose a piece to keep, something meaningful. That morning, with the sunlight slipping through the curtains, I opened my dresser drawer and pulled out the velvet-lined jewelry box. It felt lighter than I remembered. I sat on my bed and opened the lid. Empty. My breath caught in my throat. At first, I thought maybe I was looking at the wrong box, but no, it was my box. The velvet was faded in the corners, the latch slightly loose, just as I remembered, but the contents were gone. No bangles, no necklace, no earrings, and worst of all, no bracelet. I stared into the emptiness, willing it to change. My hands shook as I carefully lifted the tray inside, hoping maybe the pieces had slipped beneath, but there was nothing, just hollow fabric and a terrible silence. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I gripped the sides of the box and sat there frozen. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. That box didn't just hold jewelry. It held memories. Each piece had a story, a moment, and now they were all gone, like someone had erased decades of my life in one quiet sweep. My mind raced. Where could they be? Did I move them? Had I hidden them somewhere? But no, I knew better. I had checked that box just months ago. Everything had been there, safe, untouched, and now empty. The realization came like a punch to the gut. Leah, she had done it bit by bit, piece by piece. She had been helping herself to the very parts of me that I treasured most. The ring was just the beginning. A hot tear slid down my cheek, followed by another. My chest ached, not from anger, but from grief, not just over the gold, but over the loss of trust, of dignity, of the quiet understanding that I was no longer safe in the home I helped build. I pressed my hands to my face and let myself cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, tired tears of someone who had swallowed too many small betrayals, hoping they would stop if she just stayed kind enough, quiet enough. But now it was too much, too far. Later that evening, when I brought up the missing items to Ryan, he barely looked up from his laptop. "Are you sure you didn't misplace them?" I just stared at him, the words catching in my throat. There it was again. That same wall, that same dismissal. "No," I said firmly. "I didn't." He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Look, Mom, I'm sure there's an explanation. Maybe Leah was cleaning, and she didn't clean." I snapped, sharper than I intended. "She took them." He looked up at me finally, but not with concern, with frustration. "Mom, don't start this again." Like I was the problem, I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. My heart was already in pieces. I wouldn't let him shatter what was left. In that moment, I realized something cold and certain. I could no longer trust the people I shared my roof with, and no one was going to protect what mattered to me except me. I waited until the house was quiet. Ryan had taken Ava to piano practice, and I heard Leah moving around upstairs alone. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, steadying myself. My heart thudded in my chest, a war between fear and fury. Then I walked up to her bedroom door and knocked. She opened it with a raised brow, phone in hand. "Yeah, I need to talk to you," I said firmly. She rolled her eyes, then stepped aside. I walked into the room that once belonged to my son, now entirely overtaken by designer bags and scented candles. There were boxes from online shopping stacked neatly in the corner. Leah sat on the edge of the bed, crossed her legs, and looked at me like I was a nuisance in her kingdom. "My jewelry box is empty," I said quietly, watching her face. She didn't even blink. "All of it. My bangles, my earrings, the necklace from Michael, the bracelet he gave me for our anniversary." She shrugged, completely unfazed. "Yeah, I sold them." The words hit me like a slap. My mouth opened, but no sound came. She tilted her head and smirked. "Relax. I didn't melt your memories if that's what you're crying about. I sold the gold. Got a decent amount, too. You should thank me." "Really?" I stared at her, trying to understand if this was a joke. Some cruel, twisted test for what? I choked. "Stealing from me?" She let out a dry laugh. "It wasn't stealing. You weren't wearing them. They were just collecting dust. And it's not like we're swimming in cash. We have a baby to raise. I used the money for Aiden's future." "Aiden's future?" My voice cracked. "You think robbing your son's grandmother teaches him anything good about the future?" She leaned forward, face inches from mine, voice syrupy sweet. "It teaches him that you don't sit on things that aren't useful anymore. You do something with them. You contribute." The way she said contribute sent a chill down my spine. I backed away from her. My hands trembled. "I trusted you," I whispered. "I welcomed you into this home. I cared for your son like he was my own. And you? You went behind my back and gutted my past." She stood now, arms crossed, eyes blazing with arrogance. "You need to get over it, Ellen. This is our house now. Maybe it's time you stop acting like the queen of some sad little castle. You should be thanking me for not tossing that junk in the trash." I walked out before I collapsed right there on her rug. Ryan came home a little while later. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the empty jewelry box in front of me like an open wound. I waited for him to put down his keys, kiss Ava goodnight, and then I pulled him aside. She admitted it. I told him. She sold my jewelry, all of it. He blinked, startled. "What?" "Everything. The bracelet, the bangles. She said it was for the baby." He looked away and exhaled slowly. "Mom, please don't do this tonight." I stared at him. "Don't do what?" "Tell you the truth." He rubbed his face, then looked at me with tired eyes. "Leah told me you've been stressed lately, that you've been accusing her of things. I just figured you thought she was right." I said, my voice rising. "I made it all up, that I misplaced an entire box of gold." "She said you gave her permission once," he mumbled. I felt my heart split in two. "I never gave her permission," I said slowly. "Ryan, I would never give away those pieces. They were parts of me." He didn't respond, and that silence screamed louder than anything he could have said. I looked at him then. Not the little boy I raised, not the man I believed would protect me, but a stranger who no longer saw me as someone worth believing. "You always overreact," he muttered, walking away. And just like that, something inside me cracked. Not just my heart, not just my trust, but the illusion I had clung to for far too long. That family would always stand by me. That night, I sat alone with the jewelry box in my lap, running my fingers across its soft lining, as if my memories might still live in its corners. But they were gone, and so was any hope I had left in this house. That night, after Ryan walked away and Leah locked herself in their bedroom without a shred of guilt, I sat in the dark at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound keeping me company. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders, not from the cold, but from something else, something lonelier, a kind of emptiness that sank into your bones. And I started to think not just about the bracelet or the gold they stole, but about every little piece of myself I had handed over day after day, year after year. Not because I had to, but because I loved them. Because that's what you do when you're a mother, right? You sacrifice quietly, constantly. I remember the first time Leah and Ryan had a fight in this house. They had only been married 6 months. Ryan had just lost his job, and Leah was frustrated, saying things I never thought I'd hear from a wife. I was in the kitchen pretending not to hear every cruel word she hissed at him. "You're not a man if your mother's still paying the bills," she snapped that day. I had tucked $100 into Ryan's wallet the next morning without saying a word. Not because I agreed with her, but because I couldn't bear to see him beaten down. And I never said a thing. I stayed silent when they'd come home late at night, stumbling through the hallway while I watched Aiden, sometimes until midnight. No thank you, no sorry for the late night, just a quick handoff like I was a sitter they couldn't afford to replace. I cooked meals, cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry that wasn't mine. I bit my tongue when Leah tossed my meatloaf in the trash and ordered takeout instead. I didn't complain when they took over the living room with their loud friends or turned up the TV while I tried to rest, because I thought if I just stayed helpful enough, quiet enough, loving enough, they'd remember who I was. But over time, I started to fade like a shadow in the corner, like a fixture in the house. I stopped being Ellen, the woman who raised Ryan with her whole heart, and became Grandma, the babysitter.
Mom.
The extra mouth to feed. The old woman in the room no one looks at twice. It didn't happen all at once. It was slow, almost graceful. A small decision here. A swallowed comment there. I stopped correcting Ryan when he brushed past me. I smiled tightly when Leah forgot to include me in dinner plans. I learned to take up less and less space physically and emotionally until there was barely any space left for me at all. I remembered watching Aiden one morning. He was sitting on the floor with his toy trucks, humming to himself. The sun was pouring through the blinds. And for a moment, I felt a flicker of joy. But then Leah came in, grabbed her coffee, and said without looking at me, "Oh, can you keep him a little longer? I'm meeting Tara for brunch. Don't let him eat too many crackers this time." "No, please." "No, thank you." Just a command. I obeyed it like I always did because I thought being needed was the same as being loved. But it wasn't, not in this house. Here, being needed meant being used, and once you had nothing left to give, they stopped seeing you altogether. I looked down at my hands, calloused, soft in some places, wrinkled and worn. These hands held Ryan when he was sick. These hands tied his shoes, packed his lunches, ironed his shirts for his first job interview. These hands buried my husband, then kept on going. And yet these were the same hands they now dismissed, ignored, and quietly robbed, counting every scar, emotional, invisible, layered with years of love and silence. I began to realize something that broke my heart even more. I wasn't just invisible in my son's eyes. I was replaceable, disposable. But somewhere under all that grief, something stirred. A whisper of myself. A version of me that used to speak up, that used to stand tall, that wouldn't have let anyone, family or not, treat her like she was nothing. I missed that woman. And I was starting to wonder if maybe it wasn't too late to find her again. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. It was a Tuesday morning. Gray sky, light drizzle, the kind that made everything feel heavier. I wore my plain beige coat, tucked my purse under my arm, and walked 3 blocks to the bus stop.
No makeup, no jewelry.
Not that I had any left. The bus ride felt endless, even though it was only 20 minutes. I stared out the window at familiar streets, at couples holding hands, at old women like me walking their little dogs with coats that matched their own. I wondered if any of them had ever been robbed by someone they loved. My hands trembled the entire ride. The first pawn shop sat on the corner of 3rd and Maple. Dusty windows, a neon "We Buy Gold" sign buzzing faintly. I stepped inside, and a bell above the door gave a shrill little ring. The man behind the counter looked up. Middle-aged, worn flannel shirt, glasses low on his nose. "Can I help you?" I swallowed. "I'm looking for something that may have been sold here, a gold bracelet, very distinct. It had a wave pattern and a small heart charm engraved, forever." He squinted slightly, thoughtful.
When?
"A few weeks ago, maybe a month." He turned to his computer, clicking through records. The silence stretched out long enough for me to start losing hope.
But then he paused. "Hold on," he said.
"That engraving sounds familiar." He disappeared into the back room. I stood there alone, surrounded by glass cases filled with things people had given up. Guitars, watches, wedding rings. All someone's story, all left behind. The man returned with a folder in his hand. "We already melted the gold down," he said softly. "But I keep photos for unique items. Had a feeling about this one." He opened the folder and showed me a printout. There it was, my bracelet. Even in the grainy image, I could see the little heart charm catching light. Michael's engraving still clear, still beautiful. My fingers hovered over the page like I could reach through it. "She brought it in herself?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yeah," he said. "Young woman, brown hair, tall, kind of sharp attitude. Said it was hers." My throat tightened. "She get much for it?" He shrugged. "Not as much as it was worth. We're not a charity. Can I get a copy of the transaction?" He studied me a moment, then nodded. "Technically, I'm not supposed to without a police report," but he lowered his voice. "You're not the first person I've met with eyes like that. Eyes that say someone close did them wrong." He printed the form. Date, item description, Leah's full name, her signature, proof. He slid the paper across the counter to me. I stared at it. The ink looked fresh. Her handwriting was unmistakable. My name was even listed in the description. She didn't even try to hide it. I took the page carefully and folded it into my purse. My hands were trembling again. The man behind the counter handed me a tissue, without a word. I didn't even notice the tears had started falling. "Thank you," I whispered. I walked out into the rain and didn't bother with my umbrella. I let the cold drops fall freely, mixing with the quiet sobs that escaped from somewhere deep inside me. I sat on a nearby bench and looked at the receipt again. There it was in black and white, confirmation that everything I had feared was true. Leah hadn't just taken my bracelet. She had stolen it, sold it, and signed her name to it like I didn't exist. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the fact that she didn't believe I'd matter enough to notice that even if I did, no one would believe me. That Ryan would brush it off, and I'd stay silent like always. She didn't think I'd go this far. She didn't think I'd fight back. But as I sat there in the rain, a new feeling stirred beneath the sadness: resolve. She had taken something sacred, and now I was going to take something back. I never imagined I'd be the kind of woman to walk into a lawyer's office. I always thought legal battles were for other people, people with money, people with power, people who hadn't spent most of their lives keeping the peace. But that morning, I did it anyway. I tucked the pawn shop receipt into a manila folder along with a list I'd written out by hand, everything that had gone missing, every detail I could remember. Then I took the same bus I'd ridden the day before, this time heading 2 blocks past the pawn shop to a small brick office with a wooden sign: Emily Harris, attorney at law, family and elder law. The receptionist was kind. She offered me tea. I declined. I didn't want to hold anything. My hands were already shaking. After a few minutes, a woman in her mid-30s stepped out to greet me. She had a calm, open face and wore glasses that slid slightly down her nose. "Ellen," she said gently, "come on back." Her office was small but warm, lined with books and framed photos of what I assumed were her kids. I sat down, clutching my folder like it was a shield. She didn't rush me, just waited quietly until I was ready. "I think my daughter-in-law stole from me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded once patiently. "Tell me what happened." And so I did. I told her about the bracelet, the missing jewelry, Leah's cruel smirk, the pawn shop receipt. I told her about the ring on Leah's hand that once belonged to my mother, and how Ryan brushed me aside like I was imagining things. She didn't interrupt once. When I finally finished, I sat back in my chair, exhausted. My eyes were hot with held-back tears. Emily opened a notebook. "I want you to know something," she said gently. "Theft is theft. It doesn't matter if it's your neighbor, your child, or your daughter-in-law. If someone took property that belonged to you without permission, that's a crime." I blinked, startled by how simple and powerful her words were. "But it's family," I murmured. "I understand," she said. "But being family doesn't give someone the right to violate your trust. The law protects you, Ellen. Especially in cases of elder financial abuse, which is sadly more common than people realize." Elder financial abuse. I hadn't heard those words before, but they hit something deep inside me. She explained what we could do, how we could send a formal letter demanding restitution, how we could document every item that went missing, how I had more of a case than I realized, especially with the pawn shop record and Leah's signature. But I'm not looking for a fight, I said quickly. I just want them to understand they can't treat me like I don't matter. That's exactly why we take action, she said. Not out of anger, but to set a boundary, to protect yourself, to say I'm not invisible. I swallowed hard. I hadn't said those words, but it was like she'd reached into my chest and pulled out the truth. She handed me a form to fill out. We'll start with a formal notice, she said, and I'll walk you through every step. You won't be alone. I stared at the paper in front of me, my name at the top, a pen in my hand. I hesitated for only a moment, then signed. And just like that, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just the woman who cried over a missing bracelet anymore. I was someone who was doing something. As I stepped out of the office and into the cool afternoon air, I took a deep breath. The fear was still there. But beneath it, for the first time in a long while, I felt something else rising. A flicker of strength, a spark of the woman I used to be, and I was ready to fight for her. The letter arrived on a Friday afternoon. I had been sitting on the porch, a cup of lukewarm tea in my hands, pretending to read the same sentence in a book for the 5th time. I heard the mailbox clatter shut, followed by Leah's usual high-heeled stomp up the driveway. I didn't turn around. I just waited. Then I heard it. The rip of the envelope, the silence, then the explosion. What the hell is this? Her voice ripped through the screen door and echoed down the hallway like a thunderclap. I didn't move. I just closed my book gently and stood, walking slowly inside. She stormed into the living room, the letter shaking in her manicured hand. Her face was flushed, hair wild from the wind, eyes burning with fury. You got a lawyer? Ryan followed behind her, confused at first until she shoved the paper into his hands. His eyes scanned the page. What is this, Mom? What did you do? I sent a notice, I said, simply standing near the doorway. For the jewelry, the bracelet, everything that was taken from me. You're threatening legal action against your own family? Leah screeched, as if the very idea were blasphemy. After everything we've done for you, I almost laughed. Everything they've done for me.
Ist sehr daherkommlich.
You stole from me, Leah. You sold things that didn't belong to you. You called them junk, but they were my memories, my life. And you didn't ask, you just took. Ryan looked up, hurt flashing in his eyes. Mom, why didn't you come to me? I did, I said, my voice steady. You told me I was overreacting, that I was imagining things, that I should let it go. He rubbed his forehead like he was trying to hold his world together. This isn't how we handle things in this family.
No, interrupta.
This is exactly how we've handled things. Me staying quiet, me swallowing the hurt, me cleaning up the mess while pretending I'm fine. Leah paced like a cornered animal. You made me look like a criminal. You are a criminal, I said flatly. You signed your name on a pawn shop receipt with items that weren't yours, and you smiled while doing it. I did it for your grandson, she snapped. For his future, not for me. My voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried through the room like a bell. You did it because you thought I wouldn't do anything about it. Silence fell. Ryan looked between us, torn and angry. You didn't have to go this far, Mom. You could have just talked to us. I tried talking to you, Ryan, I said, my voice cracking just slightly. You chose not to hear me. Leah's mouth twisted into a bitter sneer. You betrayed us after all the times we let you stay here. I straightened my back. You didn't let me stay here. This was my home long before you stepped into it. I raised my son in these walls. I buried my husband with dignity in this very neighborhood. Don't talk to me like I'm some charity case. Leah took a step toward me, her voice dropping, venomous. You think a piece of paper scares me? You want a war? I didn't flinch.
No, I said.
I want respect. She scoffed, tossing the letter onto the coffee table. You're cruel. You want to humiliate us? I looked at her long and hard. And I said quietly, with a calm that surprised even me, now you know how it feels. Ryan's shoulders slumped. He didn't yell. He didn't defend her this time. He just sat down slowly, staring at the letter like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. I turned and walked back to the porch. The sun had started to break through the clouds, scattering light on the grass. I picked up my tea, still lukewarm, and took a sip. Inside, I heard nothing but silence. I wasn't proud of the pain in that house, but for the first time in years, it wasn't mine to carry alone. It didn't take long after the legal notice for things to unravel completely. 3 days later, Leah cornered Ryan in the hallway while I stood just a few feet away, pretending not to listen. But every word hit me like hailstones. "She's toxic," Leah snapped. "I don't feel safe with her here anymore." "She's my mother," Ryan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "And I'm your wife," she shot back.
Pick one.
That night, Ryan came into my room, our old guest room turned holding cell for my existence, and shut the door behind him. He didn't sit, just stood there fiddling with his wedding ring. "Mom," he said, "I think it's time we find you somewhere else to stay." Somewhere else. Like I was a stray dog that had overstayed my welcome. I nodded slowly, refusing to let him see the way my heart cracked all over again. "Of course," I whispered. "Wouldn't want to make anyone uncomfortable." He didn't meet my eyes. I packed my things that night in silence. Just a small suitcase and the empty jewelry box I couldn't bring myself to leave behind. I didn't have a plan, but I had pride. That would have to do for now. I called Carol, my oldest friend. We hadn't seen each other in a while, but she answered on the first ring. I couldn't say much, just a broken, "I need a place to land." And without hesitation, she said, "Come. I'll put fresh sheets on the guest bed." When I arrived, she wrapped me in the kind of hug that reminded me what unconditional love feels like. No judgment, no questions, just warmth. Her house was small and filled with plants and the smell of vanilla. It felt like peace. But that first night, as I lay in her guest room, surrounded by framed family photos that weren't mine, I cried. Not for the stolen gold, not for the house I'd left behind, but for the illusion that had finally shattered. For the family I thought I had. I cried for Ryan, for the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, for the man who now watched me leave without saying goodbye. I cried for Aiden, who wouldn't understand why Grandma was suddenly gone. And I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who once believed love was enough to keep a home whole. The next morning, Carol found me sitting at her kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee. "You all right?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "They threw me out." She sat down across from me, reached for my hand, and said something I'll never forget.
"No, Ellen.
"They didn't throw you out. You walked away, with your spine straight." I looked at her confused.
She leaned in.
"You didn't beg. You didn't scream. You didn't stoop to their level. You stood up for yourself. That's not being thrown out. That's leaving with dignity." Her words sank into the rawest part of me. I had lost so much, but I hadn't lost myself. Not this time. For so long, I had made myself small to keep the peace. I had accepted crumbs and called it love. But now, I was reclaiming something far more valuable than jewelry. I was reclaiming me. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Sterile, quiet, nothing like the scenes you see on TV. I sat at the small wooden table beside Emily, my lawyer, heart pounding behind my ribs like a drum. Leah was on the other side of the room, flawless as always in a beige blazer, her expression smug and unreadable. Ryan sat behind her, arms folded, his jaw tight. He didn't look at me once. Emily squeezed my hand under the table. "Just breathe," she whispered. When the judge entered, we all stood. And just like that, it began. Leah's attorney was polished, rehearsed. He painted a picture of confusion, misunderstanding. He claimed Leah thought the jewelry had been abandoned and that there had never been clear ownership. Leah herself took the stand, eyes wide, playing innocent. "I never stole anything," she said sweetly. "I thought," she said, "I could have those old things." She never wore them. They were just there. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, but inside something simmered. Then Emily stood and calmly presented the evidence. The pawn shop records, the photo of my bracelet, the receipt bearing Leah's signature. She read aloud the item description written in Leah's own handwriting. Gold bracelet with charm. Gifted to me by family. And then she showed a photo of that same bracelet on my wrist in an old family picture long before Leah had even entered our lives. Leah's smile faltered just slightly at first. Then Emily asked her plainly, "Did you write this description when you sold the bracelet?" Leah shifted. I don't remember. Is this your signature?" Leah's lips parted, then shut again. Emily turned to the judge. No further questions. Silence hung in the air like smoke. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Miss Leah Mitchell, it is clear to this court that you knowingly sold property that did not belong to you. The documentation is irrefutable. This is not a misunderstanding. This is theft." Leah's face turned pale. Ryan dropped his gaze. I could barely breathe. The judge continued, "This court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Ellen Cooper. Miss Mitchell is ordered to repay the assessed value of the stolen jewelry, including interest. Additionally, the court requests a written formal apology to Miss Cooper to be delivered within 10 business days." It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about the truth being seen. And now it had been spoken publicly with a gavel to mark the moment. When the judge dismissed us, Leah rushed out of the room without a glance in my direction. Ryan followed, but slower. For the briefest moment, our eyes met at the doorway. I saw something flicker in his face, shame or maybe regret, but I didn't hold on to it. I turned away. Outside, the sun was shining, bright, golden, almost theatrical in its timing. Emily and I stood on the courthouse steps while people rushed past, busy with their own lives. "You did it," she said softly. I nodded, but I didn't smile. Because this wasn't about victory. It was about closure, and the start of something new. It started slowly, just murmurs at first. A neighbor caught sight of a courthouse envelope in Leah's hands the day of the hearing. Another asked Ryan why I hadn't been around. People in small communities pay attention even when you think they don't. And then came the whispers. At church, someone leaned over to Carol and asked, "Is it true what happened with Ellen's daughter-in-law?" Carol just gave her a tight smile and said, "Ellen's doing fine now." By the end of the week, the whispers turned to questions, and the questions turned to rumors. Ryan's coworkers heard bits and pieces. One even confronted him in the break room. "Man, your mom took you to court?" Ryan, I heard later, left early that day. And Leah, well, her social media, once filled with curated snapshots of brunches, baby clothes, and motivational quotes, became a war zone. People commented things like, "You stole from your mill? Wow, elder abuse isn't a joke, Leah. This you?" Followed by screenshots of the pawn shop receipt, which someone had clearly leaked. She deleted her Instagram for a while after that. The couple that had once strutted through life like a golden pair now walked through the grocery store with their heads down. Leah stopped wearing her designer sunglasses, as if that made her less recognizable. At first, I expected to feel some satisfaction. I expected to want to gloat, to finally tell them this is what you deserve. But the truth is, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt peaceful, because this wasn't revenge. It was truth catching up. Their world, built on control, on lies, on pretending, was simply collapsing under the weight of its own cracks. I didn't push it. I didn't even speak. I just lived. I planted flowers in Carol's backyard, helped her paint her kitchen cabinets, and signed up to volunteer once a week at the local library. I read to children in the afternoons, and some days I even read to myself, something I hadn't had time to do in years. My world became simple, honest, and quiet. It didn't need applause. It didn't need to be posted or shared. And while they scrambled to protect what was left of their image, I simply was free. Neighbors stopped me at the market and said things like, "Good for you, Ellen." Not everyone would have had the courage. And I'd just smile and say, "Sometimes you do what you have to." I never mentioned the court case or Leah or Ryan. I didn't need to. Their silence had spoken volumes for years. Now mine did too. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and a balcony that overlooked a row of maple trees. But the first time I stepped inside, I knew this was mine. The sunlight poured in through the sheer white curtains I'd hung myself. It spilled across the hardwood floor like a warm welcome. There was a quietness here, not of emptiness, but of peace. For the first time in years, I didn't have to ask permission before putting a picture on the wall. I didn't have to worry about whether someone would move my things, raise their voice, or roll their eyes when I walked into a room. This place, this little place, was a palace compared to where I'd been. Each morning, I made myself tea in the blue ceramic mug Ava had painted for me years ago. I'd sit by the window, feeling the steam rise and listening to birds calling out from the trees. My bracelet, now back on my wrist, caught the morning light just right. The tiny heart charm still bore Michael's engraving forever. L. It had been returned to me after the court ruling, slightly dulled from handling, but otherwise untouched. Emily had even arranged for it to be polished. I remember crying the moment I clipped it back onto my wrist. Not just because I missed Michael, but because it felt like a piece of me had been restored, too. I didn't have many visitors. Carol came by on Sundays, bringing fresh bread or stories from her gardening group. Sometimes Ava would call me from her mom's phone and tell me about school. She didn't mention Leah, and I didn't ask. I started baking again, reading again. I even joined a little community writing group at the library. I wasn't the best storyteller in the room, but that didn't matter. I was there. I was part of something again. Most importantly, I felt seen. Not by a crowd, not by a courtroom, but by myself. I looked in the mirror and recognized the woman staring back. Not just Ellen, the mother, or Ellen, the grandmother, but Ellen. Full stop. I thought about everything I'd lost, but I thought more about everything I'd reclaimed. Peace doesn't come wrapped in ribbons. Sometimes it comes in quiet mornings, warm mugs, and open windows. It comes when you stop asking for space in someone else's life and create your own. And here in this little apartment filled with light, I finally belonged. It was a gray Thursday morning. Quiet, cool, the kind of day where everything feels just a little heavier. I was folding laundry in the living room, humming to myself, when I heard the knock. 3 short raps on the door. I froze. Something in my chest knew before my eyes confirmed it. I stepped to the window and peeked through the curtain. There he was, Ryan, standing on the porch in a wrinkled shirt, dark circles under his eyes, holding something in his hands I couldn't quite make out. I stood still for a long moment. Then I opened the door, just a crack. He looked up. Mom, his voice was quiet, hesitant. Leah left. She said she took Aiden and moved in with her sister. Said she needed space. Said I was spineless. I didn't respond. I just looked at him. He shifted awkwardly and held out the item in his hands. A photo frame. One of the few family pictures that had survived the years. The 3 of us at the beach back, when things still felt whole. I found this in one of the drawers, he said. Thought maybe you'd want it back. I opened the door a little wider, took the frame gently from his hands, and stared at it. I remembered that day. The sunburn on Ryan's nose, Michael's arm wrapped around my shoulder. The way Ryan had laughed so hard he dropped his ice cream cone. The memory was sweet, but it belonged to a time that no longer existed. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, for not believing you for everything. I looked at my son, the boy I raised, the man who stood by while his wife stole from me, who told me I was overreacting, who let me walk out of the house I had built with nothing but a suitcase and my dignity. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply said, "You let her break me." His face crumpled slightly, like he wasn't prepared for the truth to be so plain. I didn't know what to do, he said. I didn't want to lose her. I thought you'd always forgive me. And there it was. The assumption that no matter what, I'd always be there, quiet, loyal, waiting. But some wounds don't scar over. Some stay raw. Because they weren't just cuts. They were deep betrayals. I needed you to stand up for me, I said. And you didn't? He nodded, eyes glassy. I know. We stood in silence for a long time. Then he asked, barely above a whisper, "Can I come in?" I looked past him at the street, the trees, the life I'd built without him. Then back at the frame in my hand, I shook my head. Not today, Ryan. And I closed the door gently, but firmly. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge, but out of love for myself. I used to believe that being a mother meant giving everything: your time, your voice, your sleep, your youth, your peace. I thought love was measured in how much you were willing to lose. I gave and gave and gave until there was almost nothing left of me. But I was wrong. Family isn't just sacrifice. Family is also respect. And when that respect is gone, when love becomes entitlement, when kindness is mistaken for weakness, there comes a moment when you must choose. And this time I chose me. It's strange how peaceful life feels now. I wake up with the sun, not with footsteps thundering down a hallway or whispered resentment in the kitchen. I stretch, sip my tea by the window, and listen to the world outside, soft and alive. Some days I still think about Ryan. I wonder if he ever truly sees the way I faded in front of him. I wonder if he'll grow from it. I don't hold anger anymore, just a quiet sadness for the version of him that couldn't choose what was right. But even that sadness doesn't linger like it used to because I've made space in my life for better things: joy, peace, self-worth. And every time I glance down at my wrist, I'm reminded of all that I reclaimed. The bracelet glints in the light, polished and strong. It's no longer just a memory of Michael. It's a medal, a symbol of everything I stood up for, everything I fought to preserve. Not just for the sake of the past, but for the woman I've become. For so long, I thought I needed their approval, their gratitude, their love, no matter how little they offered it. But what I needed was far simpler: to be seen, to be respected, to be enough, just as I am. I didn't lose a family. I lost the illusion of one. What I gained was far more valuable. I found myself, and that is more golden than anything they could have taken.